Hi everybody, good evening.
Good evening. Everyone should be home clean for Pesach. Old man rant.
Yes.
Rave and rant. Rave and rant.
That's another
Which comes first? Sure, I don't know. This is the last lecture of our meditation on pain and suffering. In the last week, a pope was crowned, a Jesuit, I was thinking about how pain and suffering is an integral part of the Christian experience, and the suffering of Christ on the cross and the redemption of man. And we were at a Leonard Cohen concert last week.
How was it?
The high priest, he's the high priest.
Yeah, I know. That's
He's
what
the
how
rabbi.
was he?
Well, I mean, he's 78, so he's even older than me.
So how was the concert?
Great.
Was
And so I was just thumbing through some of his old poetry today because, he really does medrash. In almost every song there was a connection with the Bible, the story of Isaac, which we didn't hear, by the way, in which he mentions the paraclete. And I looked up the Greek word paraclete because the paraclete is, in Hebrew, melitz. Melitz Yosher is a melitz intercessor, someone who intercedes in the divine. Now, the Christians, of course, use Christ as the interpreter, but we have that in the Old Testament too. The intercessor, Be'ein Melitz Yosher, we have it in the Yom Kippur liturgy, etc. So he's always borrowing from this rich high priest tradition, of course.
You know how that song, Dance Me to the End of Love, you know how that started, don't you?
Yes.
Incredible.
No, tell us.
Anyway, last week we ended with the Noam Elimelech. It was his yahrzeit, we were in Lezhensk, and he comes out with this amazing statement in Parshas V'Shalach that God would never forsake his Jews. And therefore we say Zeicha L'Tzias Mitzrayim, which we'll be celebrating next week at the Seder, because that's a bigger Chiddush. That's a bigger novella for God to rescue the Jews than it is to create the world. Now, it doesn't make sense. And comes along the Noam Elimelech and says, well, to create the world, Olam Chesed Yiboneh. The world is based on Chesed, on loving kindness. God wanted to create the world so that he could share it with his creatures, that he could do good to his creatures. So that's natural for him to create the world. It's nothing. It's part of his inner nature. Whereas to kill Egyptians goes against his very nature. And therefore it's a bigger Chiddush because he does it out of his love for the Jews. And I'm standing there in Lezhensk, having come from Krakow, and I'm asking myself, Rebbe, what would you say today? And so I want to pick up where he left off, and his great-grandson, the Piasetzner, who was in the Warsaw Ghetto. I gave you the English. I was merciful today. So I gave you the English, but I'm going to read from the Hebrew. And we have talked about the Piasetzner before, Kalonymus Kalman Shapira, who lived in Piasetzner, which is basically a suburb or a small shtetl outside Warsaw. But the Jews were rounded up and brought to the Warsaw Ghetto. And from 1940 through 42, he's writing basically what turns out to be his Shabbos Drosha, but it turns out to be a very personal, autobiographical journal. In the true style of the Polish redders, okay, picking up on a medrash and working it through, and right at the end, and this is right at the end of the book. So this is in 1942, Parshas HaChodesh. So that was what we were celebrating last week. He says something that is so radical that for me it is part of that trajectory that I'm talking to you constantly about, that is the trajectory of philosophy to theology to spirituality, from Torah Sheba'al Peh to Torah Shebichsav, to from Nigler to Nister, to Kabbalah, to Chassidut, and beyond. And that, for me, is a historical trajectory. And in Parshas HaChodesh, this is really a few months before he and the Warsaw gets liquidated and he is sent to Treblinka. He writes, and I don't want to go into the whole drosha because we have a lot to cover today. He writes, and he's working off Eicha Rabbah, right? He's working off that wonderful, evocative midrash in Lamentations in which God says to Jeremiah, "Leave me alone to cry, and if you don't stop muttering me, I'm going to go into the recessed chambers where you have no access and I will cry there alone." So he's playing off like the Polish casitas does, right? The Sfasemis, the Shem Shmuel, the Cutoff. They start with these midrashim and they work their way off that, right? Unlike Chabad, which does a kind of a meditation, it's an essay, cohesive, philosophical essay. It's very different in Poland, right? They're talking to their Chassidim, it's Shalosh Shudas, and they're working off these midrashim. So he says, you know, and a person who believes there will be times he will wonder about himself. Hello, Nishba Ani, I'm already broken. I'm constantly crying, I'm breaking into tears. So, Torah. How can I be possibly involved in Torah now? This is the ghetto. We can hardly survive. Right? What can I do to find the strength, not just to learn Torah, but to discover להתחזק וללמוד בצורוסי Yisrael המרובים כל כך? How can I find myself to discover new Torah? And then he goes ahead and says something that for me is the greatest Hiddush in Chassidus of the 20th century that no one has said before, in which he has moved the trajectory of what we had originally said was classical rabbinic understanding of what suffering is. It's because of our sins. He's moved from that in 1940 to 1941 where he says there was never a suffering like this. And now in 1942 he says the following. This is the difference. Right? He says, I'm broken, I've cried so much, my life is fraught with grief. I've lost my introspective, self-analytical ability. Right? But as we said above, now he quotes that medrash. He is lost inside his introspective, self-conflicted self. But as we said above, Hashem is crying within his inner chambers. He's crying within his inner chambers, right? Quoting that the Gemara Chagiga, Daf Hey, Isa de Bote Roy, Ois Vached V'Kum Bote Gavoy. So there's this Bote Gavoy, which is the inner chamber, and the Bote Roy, which is the outer chamber. And Kiru Lebekodanim called the dirge singers, and Jeremiah says, and God says, no, I don't want them. I am in mourning myself. Oy sheherabti is boss basi, right? Woe to me! This is this self-pity that I have destroyed my own house, Beis Hamikdash. So he goes back to that, and he says it is the Holy One who's crying within the inner chambers. And then he adds, Al kashem mitameitz umoshit et rosho v'nogea b'torah v'avoda. if despite everything, he continues to break his isolation and overcome that grief. Oz nichnashu el habote gavai. He is allowed into that inner chamber. Sheshom HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Sham bocher, and there he cries u'minail, and he wails imo kavyochol, with God. Kavyochol. Meaning that there is a point of suffering, and this is new Torah from the P.S. Etzner, never before said in Casitas. That if you come to that place, and remember we talked Lahavdil with Simon Weil, be nailed to the cross, the dark night of the soul, where you have nowhere to go, right? You are so stuck that there is no escape. At that point, you enter that inner chamber, and you have the privilege of crying with the divine, of identifying with the divine pain. And from that, you get, in the midst of the pain, you get the strength to learn Torah and worship God, whatever that means. And I think that this is, that in the 20th century, we have someone who is the Einikel of the Noam Elimelech. So when I was saying in the Gens, what do I say to you? Well, Rebbe, what are you saying? And it's plastered over the Tzion. That's Keta from Parshas V'Shalach. Chas v'shalom, the Eibishter would forgive, would let go of his Yidden and not, he would even kill Egyptians, which goes against his own inner nature. Such a baroque Torah, right? What would he say? Here's the Einikel talking and saying, we're not giving up on it. We're not giving up on you. What can we do? What Heschel calls the pathos of the divine pathos. I actually have the privilege of identifying with the divine pathos in that pain and suffering. Now, what does that mean to identify with the divine pathos? Last week we said Moses asked God at the height of his career, Hareini no kvodecha, show me your glory. And we said that God says you can't see my face, you can only see my afterglow, right? My achorai. And the Zohar says my face, well, my afterglow, I don't know what that means. So the Zohar says, quoting a Gemara, Hera Einov, we say in the Yanim Zemira, Kesher Tefillin Herove, right? He showed him the behind. Well, what did he show him? He showed the Kesher of the Tefillin. And the Zohar in last week's parsha says that if that's the Kesher of the Tefillin, then his face would be the Tefillin Shel Rosh. And the Gemara Bracha says, what does it say in God's Tefillin Shel Rosh? It doesn't say Shema Yisrael. We say Shema Yisrael. Hear, O Israel, our Lord is God, right? So what does God's tefillin have? Mi ka'amcha Yisrael. In his tefillin, it's a mirrored image. Can you imagine that amazing rabbinic imagination, right? It's the mirrored image of what we say to him. He's saying it's a love relationship. He's saying, Mi ka'amcha Yisrael. You can't see that, he says to Moshe. I'm not showing you that. No man can see that and live. Your love would explode. But I'll show you the Kesher Tefillin. And I wanted to suggest, what is the Kesher of the Tefillin? Remember, it's the crossroads that connects the Tefillin Shel Rosh with the Ritzuos. It's that cross straps. Remember, the right strap is longer than the left because Chesed is right, Din is. So the right must overcome the left. So this is all the mentalities, the Chabad, right? Everything up here is intellectual. Everything down here, you put it on the Tefillin Shel Yad opposite the heart. So this idea of Tefillin Shel Rosh and Tefillin Shel Yad is very much this conflict that we have been struggling with, right? This conflict. I have a problem. Divine theodicy, suffering, pain. I can talk to it from the head, or I can talk to it from the heart. I can't talk to it from both. There is a point at which the two intersect. That's the Kesher Shel Tefillin. It's the space between the head and the heart. It's the space, that point, that I want to talk about tonight. As we've gone through the last 5 weeks or lectures, what I've been trying to project is the architecture of this trajectory that starts with, both in my own biography, the start in this philosophical discussions with the Cambridge guys, Jonathan Sachs, Barry Schechter, and the others, through to the theological, and finally to the spiritual. And I must just quickly go through the list because I want to set the stage for my final, the future. I want to talk and tell you that I was moved by Jung and the Jung's idea of mythos. That is, the fictional narratives that we give our people or ourselves. If I ask you to write a biography, the biography has very little to do with the facts. It's the way the facts have been interpreted through your unconscious and your conscious. Same goes for a nation. You know, we're celebrating Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's just this huge, huge story that we identify ourselves with, right? And the blacks too. They appropriated the idea of liberation from the Exodus. They used that in their black songs, right? Freedom from slavery. And guess who else uses it? Liberation theologians in the Catholic Church, like the Jesuit priest who's now the Pope. They made use of Exodus and Yetzias Mitzrayim for liberation theology for the downtrodden and the poor of South America, right? So these are what Jung calls, this is a collective unconscious that keeps bubbling up these ideas and themes. And I was very moved by that. I was also very moved at a point. He taught me that there's a difference between God and the God image. God is the Eibishter. Can you describe him? No. Read the Rambam. Only negatively. So we know nothing about God. Yet each of us has within us a God image. Some of us think he's a man in the sky with a long white beard. Other people think looks like the Buddha, right? Whatever it is, you have a God image that is framed by your upbringing, by your ethnicity, by your church or synagogue, by the way you were raised, by your culture, by Hollywood, by Spielberg, etc. That's the God image. People didn't understand that about Jung, and so he had a big fight with Father White in the end, and even with Martin Buber, because they misunderstood what he was really getting at. He's not a theologian. He was never talking about theology. He was talking about psychology. And he was saying that my job is to observe people and to observe their unconscious. And he had this amazing dream after his heart attack in 45, 46. He's had this heart attack. He's in the hospital in Zurich. And he has a dream. And until then, he really has nothing to do with Judaism. He's going to the Far East. He goes to Africa. He goes to the Hindu. Everything but Yidden. And he has a dream that Tiferet has a wedding with Malchut. And it comes to him in this dream. After that, he calls up Gershom Sholom, and Gershom Sholom comes to the Ascona conferences, and he calls Eric Neumann, his pupil, and says, what's going on? And the whole thing, you know, if you go on Google, if you look at the Admormi Google and check Sanford Drob, D-R-O-B, he's done a whole thing on Jung and Kabbalah. But there's no question that, you know, he was a very good observer of the unconscious, in many ways different to Freud. So I have to express my debt to him. I have to express my debt to post-critical thought. What do I mean that? Postmodern thought, which we haven't talked much about because it's very literary, but it impacts on my theology, is that the whole enterprise in modern literature has been, especially since the postmodernists like Derrida and Adorno, is to look at the whole of modernity from the end of the hegemony of the church and the Counter-Reformation into the Enlightenment, down to Auschwitz, as a unit. And the two major things that I got from studying this body of literature is, one, the critique of modernity, that's why they're called postmodernists, is that modernity is just theology but secularized. So instead of having God, we have our idols, technology, science. We use the same language. We borrow language from theology to apply to science, to apply psychology, to apply to literature, to apply to sociology. But when you unpack it, you realize that our brain chemistry or our neural networks haven't really changed. We just got rid of God. How prescient was Nietzsche? How prescient. We just got rid of God and we just substituted Stalin, Hitler, this, that, whatever it was, and we borrowed theological terms to do that. Once I saw that, I realized, my love affair with modernity has to come to an end, Science isn't the answer. Technology isn't going to be the answer. And in fact, it ended up with Auschwitz. Because once you take God out of the equation, so then man becomes God, then I can use technology as a killing machine. Oh, the machine gun! I can now stand behind a trigger and kill multiple, mow them down. Concentration camps. First one was where? Who's responsible for the first concentration camp?
Turks.
The Brits. The Boer War. Hitler said, I'm going to learn from the Brits. He didn't invent it. And since then, genocide continues. Hasn't stopped, right? So technology, using drones now, a man can sit with a video game and kill 19 wedding celebrators. Then we talked about the Holocaust thinkers after Wiesel, who developed the new language of killing, the language of genocide, the language of the Shoah. Came along Rubinstein, Fackenheim, Soloveitchik, Steiner. These people influenced me in developing the tools to talk about the unthinkable and the untalkable. How do you talk about it? And some people criticize that fellow for the comedy, that comedian, for doing that film on Hitler.
Mel Brooks.
Mel Brooks. Mel Brooks called, what was it called?
He had a
Hitler in
song.
springtime or something?
Yeah. The producers, right? And he got, and all the Yidden were up in arms. How could you make a thing? But in a sense, right? How do you talk about the unspeakable? And comedy is one way of doing it. Okay, and then we came to the Hasidic thinkers, who then moved my trajectory away from this philosophical notion of God is up there and we're down here, and then he's responsible because he didn't do anything about it, and so how are we going to deal it? Berkowitz and Soloveitchik and the kind of those who do that splitting game. And I did that because of my own midlife crisis, because I realized that however frum you are and how many Daf Yomi cycles you do, right, your dictions didn't go away, your character didn't get refined, right? You're still a letz, you're still a jerk, you're still this, you're still that. So until I internalized that, in which learning in the Zohar, which I was thinking, oh my gosh, this sounds like Jung. And the Zohar says, everything has a sitra achra. The sitra achra is just the other side of the divine. It's not out there. It's not the devil, right? Everything is God. So if everything is God, where's the evil, right? And that brings us to Luria and the shattering of the vessels, which I don't want to go into. But Kabbalah teaches me the following three things, because that's what we've come to today. We've gone through Hasidus, and we've now come to Kabbalah. Kabbalah teaches us, one, that spirituality is a hologram. Now, in Hasidus, they say, whatever's down here is mirrored up there. But that doesn't do justice enough to the holographic image. Because the holographic image states that the Pasuk in Job says, Umivsori echezeh Elokai. from my flesh I behold God. Now, the pshat is obviously Job is filled with boils and blisters, and he's ready to surrender. But the Hasidic masters say, umivsari, that is, the holographic image of my spiritual self, the imagined self, echazeh, I can project onto the divine. So that the divine in Kabbalah has a projected image that looks very similar with the mentalities, the emotionalities, and the physicalities, the way a man is structured. So that is the holographic image, meaning it's no longer about me and him. It's that me and him of the philosophers share the same DNA structure. That is the SS-spheros, the 10 spheros. That's the DNA that everything that is alive shares. Now, having said that, the other second big chiddush of Kabbalah is that there is a split in the divine. And that the divine that is called the Sovev, which in the Rambam and in the philosophers would be the transcendent divine, is not something that I can apprehend. He's almost unconscious because it's beyond, it's infinite, it's something that is not something that my mind can grasp. Whereas the Mamale, that is, that part of the divine light that has come across the Tzimtzum, across the vacated space, into the real world, which is the immanent divine, that is the one that shares with me that spiritual genetics. So, in Kabbalah, that split is the tragedy. That's called the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum is the split within the divine. And the Arizal starts by saying, in the beginning there was just a point. That was the divine. It was the iota. It was everything. And at one point, he's showing you this as a metaphor, he made space in himself for this vacuum. And in that vacuum, there was a line of light that came to fill the vacuum, and that is how the worlds came into being. It's almost like spiritual physics. But what the point is, the question is, this is a vacuum. So God is not here, according to the Arizal, or how you interpret the Arizal. God is beyond. That's the Sovev. But then he sends a ray, which is the Mamale, into the space, the vacated space. Doesn't reach the other side. It's just hanging there. And on that comes these branches which we call reality, hanging on it. The question that happened, this big machlokas between the students of the Vilna Gaon and the Chabad masters was, is this imagined or real? If it's real, then God's not in the world. So I pray to a transcendent God that's beyond, the way the Rambam does. But if the Chabad masters are right, then this is just an illusion. And then the function of Torah mitzvahs is to get rid of my illusion so that I can see reality, that God is in fact in the world and everywhere. But then if he's in the world, what about evil? And that's where I got stuck for years until I came to Reb Nachman. And Reb Nachman introduces us to quantum Chassidus. Because in quantum Chassidus, well, in quantum physics, is it a particle or is it a wave?
Yes,
It's both. How can it be both? It's beyond rational understanding. It's both. That you're telling me that, but that's just a language game, right? Well, how can it be both? It's either A or B. It can't be A, B. Well, it is. It is in the language of quantum mechanics. So let's read Reb Nachman to understand how that happens. And I want to tell you that because I'm not giving you a lecture in theology. What I'm trying to do is to understand that split, not out there so much, but because it's a holographic image, it's not just about Nazis and Hitler and evil out there. It's about the evil within me. And how do I relate to the divine If that's a holographic image of the divine, split, evil is present, there's a vacated space, how am I going to deal with my own? And that's where my trajectories are finally coming together. That is, that these philosophical, theological questions that plagued me since childhood are intimately connected with dealing with the darkness within me. Now let's read Reb Nachman. So that's the first.
We don't know what is first.
That's the double columned one. Okay? And it says, I put a little arrow, key. So this is Torah Samach Beis. Before I start, I want to say that some call this line, this presence of the divine in the vacated space, the Shechina. So the split is between the Kutsha Brichu and the Shechina. And the mitzvah is L'Shem Yichud Kutsha Brichu and Shechina. My mitzvahs, my life, my suffering is to reunite the Shechina with the Kutsha Brichu, because right now it's split. As Rab Nachman says, the princess is lost. The lost princess. She's the Shechina. So the Sheni Lamalchus, the advisor to the king who's searching for her, is trying to reunite her with the king. Now, this is about me. This is about me. Ki tzorich la'avod es Hashem b'shnei yitzorim. Remember, the Tanya is very different. Very different. This is admitting, what do I do with the Yetzer Hara? If I'm split between the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara, tzorich la'avod et Hashem b'shnei yitzorim. How come? Sheyiyeh ha'yetzer hara kofuf li'yetzer tov. The original intent is that the yetzer hara, right, the addict within, is meant to be kafuf, to bow to the yetzer tov. As it says in the Gemara in Brachos, v'yahavta es Hashem b'chol levavecha. B'chol levavecha implies with your whole heart, which means your heart may be not whole, it may be split. B'shnei yitzrecha, with your two yetzes. Sheyiyeh libo sholem im Hashem, that your heart should be complete. No, you know me better than that. I'm not going to let you get away with that. Sholem, how would I translate sholem?
Complete.
Integrated. I'm holding my darkness, I'm holding my frumkeit together in tension with each other. You think you can be, who you fool? I don't fool myself. I can shockle all I want, but I got a Yetzer Hara better than yours and bigger than yours.
Wow.
Right? Shelo yiyeh machloikis ben shnei yitzorim. So your libo should be shalem. It means it should be integrated so that they're not fighting each other all the time. Hainu shelo yiyeh libo cholokolov. Okay. So
I think it's shalem because the Yetzer Hara is kafuf to Yetzer HaTov. And therefore...
But kafuf means negated or bowed down or compressed or... If I'm subjugated. Well, if I subjugate you, are you gone? You're not gone. You still hate me.
It's transformed. You're supposed to transform.
That's Chabad. I said this is Breslov. This is not Chabad. We're not transforming anything. We're very much aware of the power of the addict. Now, go to the next page. V'hatiken lezeh machloka shebelev. That's the next page over here.
Okay.
How do I fix that? How do I fix this broken heart, this broken soul within me? Letakin oto b'shara. Now he says something very crazy. He says, "What do you think you're going to fix the world? Do you realize that you're a holographic image of the divine? Oh, ki ika hisavas machloikes hayetzer hara, shorsho, its root, its holographic image upstairs, Min machlokas shebekdusha. It comes from the similar machlokas, that similar struggle that's occurring upstairs. So stop trying to carry the world on your shoulders. Stop trying to be the next Moshe Rabbeinu. Realize that what's happening to you is happening to the upstairs. The machlokas that's happening to you is just a descent of the original machlokas in the Tanoim and the Amorim and the Gemara. It's not happening just to you. I'm going to quote the Degel. The Degel says in Parshas for Eira.
Who was he?
Okay, so the Baal Shem,
Yeah, okay.
he had a daughter Udal. She had 3 children. The Degel, that's the Rebbe Ephraim of Siddelkov. Fegi, who's Reb Nachman's mother, and Nachman of Horodenka.
Okay.
So Reb Nachman, I see a lot of Reb Nachman in the Degel. And he grew up on his lap in Mezhigah. So the Degel says, in the name of his grandfather, the Baal Shem, he says, there's a Zoya that says, Tzadikayu inun shluchi de matronisa, that the tzadikim, the saints, are the messengers of the matronisa. Matronisa is a Latin term from matron, which means the Sheena. They are her messengers. And what does he mean by that? So the Baal Shem HaKadosh says, Kisheyesh chas v'sholom eizet tzara v'tzar la'odam. If something is afflicting you, Yavin, what's your function? To come to das, to come to bina, to understand shebevadai lo tsar kav yochol, that the Shechina is suffering, not just you. You're a holographic image of the divine. So if you're suffering, the Shechina is suffering. Hatzora hazeh v'chisora hazeh yesh b'Shechina v'lo hoyu yodim ezel ispalel oleha. And because we don't know how to daven for her, because we're so stuck in our own self-absorption, lekach sholech Hashem oisa hatzora v'chisoron ala tzadik. Therefore, God sends the tzara so that you should understand the pain of the Shechina. If something bad happens to me, it's a wake-up call, not about me. We are all holographic images of the divine. So we are therefore being given a wake-up call to realize her pain. Ki yadua hashchina kavyachol nikrat shua v'hu she'etzoakim avor hashchina kavyachol lekarev hashchina nikrat shua beherchok upiruta, because she is separated from her beloved. And when she is separated, she's in pain. But when I forget about her. So I'm sent something, a tsar, to remind me to daven for her.
So when you talk about Sheena, is that why you're calling God her? You keep saying her.
Her, yes. It's the feminine divine, right. But Anshe Shahoyo Bazeh HaMadrega. In the time of the Baal Shem, those men, the tzaddikim at the time of the Baal Shem, they didn't daven for the lack in them. I didn't get enough money, I had sorrows, they never davened for that. They just rak al chisoron hashchina kavyachol. So when Reb Nachman is saying the tikkun of this goes all the way up, he's talking about this Sheena consciousness. That if I understand that the machlokas of the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara in me isn't just about me, it's a holographic image of what's going on in the divine, then he says at the end, Zeh osius sholom. Now I'll tell you what sholom means. Sholom doesn't mean happy, doesn't mean peace, it doesn't mean integrated, doesn't mean any of this. Sholom is the letters, notarikon, right? The first letter of each stands for Da Mashe Toshuv La'apikoros. You will come to this Das. Das is not Bina or Chochmah. Das is experiential. You will, through your suffering, for the divine, knowing that you have this maven. I understand it's not just happening to me. This constant awareness that Sheena is in the blotter with you, in the mud, suffering alongside you. Then you come to something called Sholom. And Sholom stands for Da Mashetoshev Lapikoros, meaning that little philosopher in yourself that says, how could God do this to me? How could God be good and love his son? How could the little Apikoros inside you, he calms down. That's what the Rebbe is saying. So what does it mean through Torah and mitzvahs that we do it? Look at the second page. That's Likutim around Nun Vav Dalet. This whole Torah is about Esther. And it's about Esther standing for the hidden divine, the unconscious self. And he says there are two levels of unconsciousness. One is hastara, meaning God's hidden. I'm still eating my hamburgers, my cheese hamburgers. And I know that God said I shouldn't, but he's hidden. I don't see him, he doesn't see me, I'm going to get away. That's hastara. And for that, you just need to do tshuva. Right? Get over the addiction for hamburgers, or what other else addictions you have. Well, not so easy. Then, when you get used to living that lifestyle, God doesn't even become aware to you. It's the hastara betoch hastara. It's the hiddenness starts hiding itself. And when it hides itself, there's no God, there's nothing. Everything is fine. You're in such darkness that you're not even aware that there's a problem. So he says, Vada. Anytime Reb Nachman says Vada, you better fasten your seatbelt.
What does that mean, Vada?
No.
No.
Yeah,
But it's a technical term. It doesn't just mean no. It means spend a month just looking at this and meditating. Vada. Now, I just fasten your seatbelts because this Torah has never been said before. Sheha Torah amelubish tocha hastara shebetocha hastara. Torah is everywhere. Reb Nachman follows the Baal Shem, not the Vilna Gaon, the Chabad masters. This is just an illusion. So there is no tzimtzum. Of course there's a tzimtzum, but there isn't. So Reb Nachman comes to this paradoxical that there is and there isn't at the same time. So the hastara betoch hastara is so hidden that you don't see God in the vacuum. You don't see God in your life or in the world. That's hastara betoch hastara. He says, you know why we have that? Because the Torah cannot be hidden. If the Torah would be revealed, then everyone would grab it. The deepest secrets of Torah are hidden in Esther. Remember, Purim will never, even after Purim will never be abandoned, never be abolished, because it's the hidden festival. It's higher than Yom Kippur, because it's got the hidden Torah. The hastara b'toch hastara has within it, like everything in the world has within it, godliness. And the Torah, which means for him spirituality of godliness, is Gavo Daika. The highest of the high Torah is hidden in the deepest recesses of the hiddenness of the hiddenness. Now, hiddenness for Reb Nachman, had he lived 100 years later with Freud, would be, for me, unconscious. So whenever Reb Nachman says it's hidden, means it's hidden from my consciousness. It's in my unconscious. The Torah that's in my unconscious has the deepest secrets. I'm a holographic image of the divine, after all. Because she has to hide herself and she has to dress herself up because she has to go to these dirty places like cheeseburger bars. She's hidden so much that she has to cover herself with coverings and coverings because she's dragged down into Nazi concentration camps. Therefore she has to be clothed and clothed and clothed and hidden and hidden. Now listen to the next three lines. I underlined it because that's the punchline here. Hainu. What does it mean she's hidden in the hidden? With who? Eitzel Elu She'ovru Harbe. He just says three words. And that speaks to every Yid. Eitzel Eile
those who have avru harbe, gone through a lot.
Say that again.
Gone through a lot.
Who are those people who have dragged her down, or who she has to hide herself? Those who have lost their connection with the divine because of their suffering, because of their pain, because of what they've gone through. And that has taken them so much away from the luxury of spirituality. They just can't make a buck. They're suffering, divorce, this, illness, whatever it is, the pekelach that we carry. It's not just about the fact that God's hidden, meaning, I know you're there and you're not helping me. Why aren't you helping me? I've given up on that. These are the survivors, right? I've given up on that. I'm in so much in the blotter that I've carried so much. I am in such deepness in my addiction and in my pain and my suffering. God decided that for those special people not to do pshat. Meaning, I'm not going to tell you to do Torah mitzvahs. Really? You think that's the real Torah? Just go there like a halachic robot. Do this, do that, do that. You think you're off the hook after that? I'm not even going to give you the pshatei Torah for you people. Alkeinu mastil malbishon Torah gavoa daika. The second two lines. Therefore he hides and dresses up a very high Torah. Dafka with them. Sisrei Torah. The mysteries of Torah. Shehi Torah's Hashem ba'atzma. It's God's Torah. It's the Torah of the Soivei. Al Kain Shom Daika Melubash Hashem Yisborach ba'atzma. Do you see at the bottom? You want to get to God. There he, the Sisrei Torah, is God dressing himself up, dafka, ba'atzmo, his etzem, his real self. That's what the Piasets is saying. You come to that point of suffering where you are invited to participate in the divine weeping, in the recessed room, where Jeremiah himself was warned not to go. This is new Torah. This is the Torah where one's own brokenness becomes, for Rav Nachman anyway, and for the Piasetzner, access to the divine pain, access to the Shechina's pain, and where I finally find that the two come together. And for me, this is the deepest secret of Kabbalah.
So what about Nemes Kornis Shema? How do you integrate that with Torah itself? It's different. Are you saying that the two bridge together? They merge together?
I think at different levels there is a need for different Torahs. So there's a Torah of Malchus. That's the lowest level. That's the Pshat. Then there's the Torah of Tiferes. That's Medrash. Then there's the Torah of Bina. That's the secrets of Torah. Then there's the Torah of Keser, which is the Torah of suffering. And the Leshem says, Talmud of the Gaon of Vilna, big Kabbalist, that there are two ways to access the divine. Either Torah mitzvahs or suffering. That's the Leshem's big Chiddush. They're drinking from the same fountain. So, we have taken a trajectory that started with our philosophical speculation as to theodicy. We went then to the weight of rabbinic tradition in Midrash, which I call solid. And then we went to the counterweight of Chassidut and Kabbalah, which I call fluid. And we've now come to this very gaseous state where we have suggested that the trajectory by which the Baal Shem HaKadosh, Reb Tzadok, Reb Nachman, Rav Kook, the Piasetzner has put us on that trajectory in which the idea of the quantum nature of Tzimtzum, that the Tzimtzum is both present and absent divine. He is present, but then he's hidden. He's hidden to such a point that he's not aware in our consciousness. And that our role in Tikkun Olam is not just be just and good works, right? Like the Reconstructionists would have us believe. That too, of course, seek justice and all that. But that's at the social level. What does one do in the broken self? Our Tikkun Olam has to be inside as well as outside. That is, character refinement, but at the same time holding the divine pain. And that's what it means today to be a Merkava to the Sheena. A Merkava is what I said last week. Chariot. A vehicle. It's a vehicle. A vehicle for the divine. Our own individual Torah, then, is what I'm suggesting this trajectory demands. It is not enough to rely on the philosophical, the rabbinic, the Hasidic. These are just trajectories for you to write your own biography, your own inner struggle. That is what is being demanded. Reb Tzadok, quoting the Ishbit, says that the Tikkun of Jacob, the icon, Jacob's image is on the Kisei HaKavod, is on the glory of the throne. What does that mean? It's a nice pshetel, but what does it mean? Jacob is beloved by the divine, but the deeper meaning is we're all part of Jacob. And God desires our own biographies, and they're plugged in into his CD-ROM on the Kisei HaKavod. So that our individual struggles here and our pain and suffering becomes integrated into our spiritual biographies, not left out for the common good and what is supposed to happen. The struggle, Reb Tzadok says, must occur here. And therefore, that is the new Torah Sheval Peh. We add to the tradition and this trajectory by our own inner struggles. Therefore, the final message that I have, having come to in my own biography, is that the inside pain, illness, decay, aging, addictions, and character flaws parallel in the same way the outside concern for the pain of others, a world unhealed as yet, and the divine pain. And that idea that both are occurring together simultaneously, one is a holographic image of the other, for me is the Hiddush and the spiritual direction that I have been looking for. Yes?
I have a question. Where is the phrase Tikkun Olam? Where do we originally find it?
Zohar.
Oh, it's the Zohar. Then how did it translate into this, I think the Reform movement more than anything, embellished it to mean that we're repairing the entire world. They never talk about the
I mean, you're
individual.
asking a historical question,
Yeah.
you know, with Zalman Schachter Shalomi and the renewal movement, because he took those ideas from Chabad and the idea of Tikkun and translated them into a modern message that would appeal to Americans. And that whole movement.
So the original was a different meaning then, you're saying?
I think that it's the meaning that you project onto it. It depends on how you read it. You know, it's different in the Zohar, and it's different in the Arizal.
But what was it in the Zohar then? Because you brought it up as the individual first.
Right.
And that's what the Zohar tried to?
Yes, I think the Zohar, especially in Parshas Vayakel, talks about the Brit and the Tikkun HaBrit as being absolutely critical to face the Shekhinah. So if a person hasn't become sexually continent, he doesn't fix his bris, then he can't have a bris with the divine. So it's all about a very individual kind of the adept, the spiritual adept, refining himself bodily, purifying himself so that he can face the Shekhinah. So that's the way it's used there. The Arizal makes it on a global scale and says, you know, that the world, the creation itself was a catastrophe. too much light, the vessel's smashed. And so the Tikkun requires Am Yisrael to take and rescue those sparks that are everywhere and put them back. These are wonderful mythologies that have historical base, and I'm very much a historian, so I'm only interested in, and I'm realizing I'm appropriating language and technical terms from prior generations, but that's how those are the building blocks for my own spirituality. Yeah.
So what's the bottom line on suffering? Are you supposed to just, what are you going to do with your suffering? You know this, that it's part of a hologram, so does this mean you tolerate it more? You do what with your suffering?
Right, I mean, I'm not sure I'm giving you a programmatic thing to do. I am trying to articulate a place of being. And in my being, I am holding both my consciousness of my own life, my own brokenness, my lies, deceits, betrayals, addictions, and everything that is the dark side of my Yetzes. And I'm holding my Yetzer Tov and my desire to do good out there, and I'm just holding that. And for me, that is shalem, meaning I am being constantly aware that whatever's happening here is happening up there, Sheena, whatever you want to call it. And as I've told you in the past, I do certain rituals to develop Sheena consciousness, right? Shabbos is Sheena, so I prepare, I don't work on Erev Shabbos anymore. Like I'm trying to get that sense of Sheena consciousness so that when it's happening to me, I'm also aware of the holographic nature of spirituality.
So you're supposed to continue with your
It's not,
addiction.
when you say the word supposed to, I'm not a halachist, I don't prescribe,
No, I know.
in my own life, I'm in the Jungian sense of integration, I have finally come to a certain sense of peace in the knowledge that, I've given up the fight against the Yetzer Hara the way I did when I was 16, and I'm saying, Rabbi Sholom, this is as much about you as about me. Help me out here, I surrender. That Simon Weil is my Rebbe there, right? He plants the seeds, it grows, it's very painful, and I watch, and I nurture, and I'm watering the soil, and hoping that this neshama just survives. It's that kind of thing. It's not about doing and being and running around and I don't think it's that anymore. I think we all have to just deepen our sense of the complexity of our souls. It's not the art scroll anymore, guys, it's just not a little man in the sky with a mitzvah bean counter. At the end of the day, don't laugh. People tell me this all the time, including my wife. We've got to do this. We've got to rack up the mitzvah points, right? That's fine in 8th grade. But it's not fine in a post-Holocaust world where we face genocide. And, how do we develop spirituality? Well, we developed it on the individual basis. And then we become a collective of individuals. And it's very different from Chabad. See, in Breslov, it's a very lowly casitas. It's a very lowly casitas. And you're in his boidas at night and Tikkun Chatzos, you're alone. It's a bunch of lowly individuals that happen to get together now and then, once a year. Right? It's not for bringing, it's a different way, it's a different path. Yeah.
I just have one question. You talk about the image, the thought of what children think, or how they're taught what Hashem is. And then how, because I know it's a conversation that always happens, that people keep that image for their whole lives. How do they understand what it is? Where do they grasp what it can mean?
Okay, so, when Elie Wiesel had this thing about putting the trial of God, so at the end of the trial, everyone said he's guilty, now let's go and daven mincha.
Oh.
That's what's going on here. Meaning, Rabbeinu isn't saying that you walk around like this. He's saying that this is the attitude. But in his Vodadus, you speak to God like a guter Freund, he says in Yiddish. A guter Freund. You talk to the Ribono Shel Olam like he's your Tata in Himmel. Meaning, there's multiple complexities to how I relate. Sometimes I related to my father as a child, and he was this authority figure, right? And then as I got older, he became more of an equal. And now, in his senior years, I'm kind of carrying the bag for him, financially, this, that, and the other. right? It's like, but when I take him to shul, he's my father, and he gets an aliyah, and I stand up, you know. It's like that kind of relationship with the Ribono Shlolom. And it says that in Medrash. Sometimes he calls me Biti, sometimes he calls me Achosi, sometimes the Yebisha says, my people, I call them Imi. Ribono Shlolom says that, Shir Shirim Rabbah. Sometimes I call you Mamala. Meaning it's a complexity. It's not just, but it is as well. Sorry, you were going to ask.
Yeah, you call it your trajectory, but you'll acknowledge, and maybe this is how to get the sensitivity, it has to be grounded in Torah mitzvahs. You know, when I learn Gemara, I know I'm learning something I learned 2,000 years ago, so I think it helps you in that.
I'll say it again.
Yeah.
The weight of rabbinic tradition is solid.
Yeah, okay.
The fluidity of Kabbalah and Chassidut is fluid. And what I am struggling with is gaseous. So the weight, you're right.
But it's based on something solid.
Right,
That's what you're
like
saying.
if I would come from the conservative tradition, that would be a shift, right? Right? The weight of rabbinic tradition would be fluid. And the Kabbalah and Chassidut would be solid.
No, but
I'm coming from Daled Amos in Halacha. My feet are fully weighted in, you know, when I went to Lizhetsk, I stopped in Krakow because of my dad. And I called him from the Ramah Shul. I said, Tati, I'm still keeping the Shulchan Aruch. Right? It's not about that.
Yeah.
It's just that is not sufficient. That's the Torah of Pshat. And there are pardes. There are 4 levels of Torah. There's 4 levels of experiencing Torah. That's all I'm saying. Doesn't mean you can just get rid of it. I mean, that was the Shabtai Tzvi problem, right? We don't need the Pshat anymore. We have Tikkun Olam, so forget about that. So we've been through that catastrophe. I'm saying that in no way does one jettison anything from the tradition, because I don't take it in a fundamentalistic art scroll fashion. I take it in a Jungian way. So these rituals are very important for nourishing my mythology. They're very important. Yetzias Mitzrayim and the Seder. The Seder is what? It's about the Shechina being in Mitzrayim, not about me. And the Zohar says that the Shechina is going to go into 4 Goliaths. So when I get up and do Tikkun Chatzos and I sit on the floor and I cry, it's for the Shechina because she's still in Goliath. So the whole Seder night is different, but I'm keeping the same halachas. I've got to get that before Chatzos and we've got to get the 18 minutes and we like the Briskers do. Fine. Okay. But that's not what it's about for me. But I'm doing it. The weight of rabbinic tradition cannot come off my shoulders. It's just weighing me down too heavy to just jettison.
If the Piensner lived, would he have changed things?
Many people have said, what would the Piensner do had he survived the war? And Hershey, who wrote this book, said to me, it's obvious what he would do. He would be taking little children. Tinokus shel beis Rabban, he would bringing them to him like he did before the First World War. Because what he was doing before the First World War was saying a child is a flower that has to be nourished. He was going against the current trends in Poland. He had a whole new way of raising Jewish spirituality. He had a whole new spirituality for younger light and young men who were married. There was a whole group around him. I mean, he was a charismatic figure.
Yeah, but he shielded them. He shielded them from the entire world, from what I read.
Absolutely. He was trying to develop what he called the imaginative soul. He wanted them to develop imagination, something that's unheard of in Talmud Torahs today. That was the Piasetzer's way. After the war, he would have doubled his efforts. For sure, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, when you're talking about all this, it reminds me of the story of the Baal Shem. Long story short, he was out in the forest many, many times, and this man would see him, etc., and he was very curious as to what was Baal Shem doing in the middle of the forest all this weeks and months and everything. So he asked him, what is it that you're doing? So the Baal Shem asked him, well, what do you do? He says, well, I'm a watchman. He says, oh, watchman, that's what I'm doing. I'm a watchman too. So I wonder if this whole thing about you looking at the Shekhinah, that's part of like the tool of being the observer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You know, if that's what he's saying there in that story. And And this is sort of a way of getting, just looking, just being an observer
Right.
out of you.
Right. And Shkoy asked me, why are you up at 3 on Friday night?
Yeah.
And I said, you know, in Breslau, they don't sleep on Shabbos. He says, oh, it's not. They have to have good food, rest, Shabbos leader. So I said, Rabbi Abraham Nachman says, you have to be a Shomer Shabbos. What is Shomer Shabbos? You have to be a Shabbos watchman. You have to watch. And the whole Shabbos has a whole different tone. Erev Shabbos, bringing her in. Welcome, Shabbos Queen. It's Gewalt. The Lelever would sit there on Shabbos shaking his head, Mamala, Mamala. He felt her presence. Shabbos morning, there was this kind of strictness about it. You know, it's like Avram. Friday night is Yitzchak, Shabbos is Avram. And it's Atika Kadisha, it's the transcendent, you know. And then, highest of the highs, Shabbos Shudas. Then it's Ponim B'Ponim, you know. And it's reflected in the Chalas, right? The Chalas on Friday night, you eat the lower one. The Challah on Shabbos morning, you eat the top one. At Shabbos Shudas, they're side by side. And that's us and the divine. That's us and the divine. Read Reb Tzadok on Shabbos, it's like Gewalt. It's Gewalt, yeah.
According to the holograph analogy, would that everything mirrored in heaven, would that mean that there was Auschwitz and a Hitler?
Right, absolutely. Absolutely. We have to say that. There's no splitting. And so therefore, if the Sheena was thrown into the gas chambers, right? So, you know, and I'm going to end up with that story, you know, that Ringelbaum is writing from the barracks, and he's writing these diaries, and Mengele is standing there, and suddenly a trainload of Polish Rebbes, separated, they get out, and Mengele points to them and says, like that, he gestures to them. And the dogs are barking, and they're taken to the side, not to the selection. Okay, so they're wearing their streimels and their talesim, so they start dancing in a circle, and the Nazi officers are howling with laughter, these Jews. Suddenly, and they know what's happened to them, and they start really getting to besimcha. What does it mean to be besimcha? They're besimcha, and they start dancing and dancing, because what is a rikud? The Shekhinah's in the middle of the circle. That's why we dance around the bima. That's why we always didn't dance in a circle. The Shekhinah's in the middle. We're dancing with the Shekhinah. And Gewalt, they're getting so mislavas. Now Mengele, he's writing this, you can Google it. He's writing. And now Mengele becomes furious. He becomes furious because he sees that he's ignited in them a spirituality and a hislavas and a hispilus for the Ribono Shel Olam, which is the opposite of what he was trying to. He was trying to break them. So he signaled them straight to the crematorium without going through the gas chambers. And they kept on dancing. It's written, a non-from guy wrote this. So, to answer your question, for sure it's happening to her. Piasetza says, we are the representation of the divine. There's no disconnection between us and the divine. Therefore, this isn't happening to us. This is a fight between Hitler and the Ribono Shel Olam. We are mere onlookers, and we have to look upon it and just hold it. That is the history of Jewish suffering. We are suffering for the divine. They thought, across the street, that one man suffered on behalf of the world and died for the world's sins. They got it right. The only mistake is they didn't realize that every Yid is the same. Every Yid represents that same divine dying on the cross. Thank you. Have a wonderful Pesach.
Thank you very much.
And we should